Hi, if you're new here, I'm Kathy from the Delafield Quilt Company, and I love quilting, and I share the projects I'm working on via this channel. Today's project is actually a carryover from the video that came out last week, which was the Spooky Quick Quilt, which is a quilt that you could easily make in one day. I had some leftover squares from that project, so I decided to turn it into a pillow. So I've actually got two pillows here, one with the witch's hat and one with this little cat here. So the pattern for the witch's hat is part of a bonus project that came with the pattern for the Spooky Quick Quilt, which is available on our website and is 50% off for the rest of October of 2023. And the cat comes from the Boo pattern, which is a free pattern that's also available on our website. I will put a link to both of these in the show notes. All right, let's get started. To make the center of the pillow, we do need a 12.5-inch block. That can either be a plain square fabric, or you can use one of these foundation piece patterns to make your center. Now the cat block does measure only 8 by 8 when it's finished, so I am going to need to add a border on all four sides of the cat just to make it big enough, because I'll need an unfinished 12.5 inches, finished 12 inches. Here's a look at the other fabric we'll need for this pillow. So when you're printing your foundation paper piece patterns, it's really important to make sure that you print at 100% output, and you don't want to print double-sided. Here's an example of what your printer settings may look like when you go to print. You also want to try to use foundation paper if you have it. You can use a copy printer paper. I just find the foundation papers are much easier to tear off and a little bit easier to see through if you're trying to flip and look into the light and see the patterns on the other side. And when you're ready to sew your foundation paper pieces, the first thing you need to do is just cut out all the patterns. You do need to leave a little bit along the dotted edge here, but you don't need to be perfect with these by any means. So I've already got the witch's hat pieces cut out, and I'll show you a little bit about what these pieces look like. So if you get this pattern in particular, I do have on here the labels of the colors that I'm using of the fabric that match the example picture, but you really could put whatever colors you wanted in here. I just do that just to be a little bit easier when you're looking and sewing at these pieces. You know what color goes where. They're also all numbered. So this is section A, and you say A1, A2, A3, and so forth. The reason they're numbered is because that's a place that we're going to start when we start sewing this. And we just need a variety of scraps, and we're going to cut them to size, so really at this point you don't have to worry about cutting them perfectly. So for this first one, we're going to start with block A. I'm going to start with the green here, which is A1, and I just need my piece big enough so it surrounds all of the sides of that A1 section. You want at least 1/4 inch on the sides. I like to go usually like a 1/2 inch around just to make it easier on myself. And the way we're going to lay these when we get ready to sew this is the pattern is going to be facing up, and your fabric is always going to be beneath the pattern so you can see where to sew on the lines. All right, for A1, I'm just going to cut a piece big enough. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Again, I like to make my pieces nice and big so I don't have any issues with being short. And we do trim it down later, so that should be plenty big. Then the next piece is going to be this A2, which is this pink color here. And I'm just cutting this so it's nice and big and will cover this whole area. It's way more than I need, but again, I like to have that extra cushion. Okay. So now that I have both of these first two pieces, this A1 piece is going to be right side up, and I'm going to lay it over that A1 section. I want to make sure it's covering all the edges around that. Now if you have a light source near you, you probably can't see this, but I have a window near me. You can often look through, see where the fabric is, and just make sure you've got it lined up. And then I'm going to lay A2 face down. There's little bats in here, I don't know if you can see that, but I want those so they're going to be up on, right side up on the witch's hat. So I'm just going to check my direction here. Okay. And then I need to lay that face down on top of A1 so that when I sew on this line between A1 and A2, I should have about 1/4 inch seam or more. And an easy way to check that is by putting a pin in there. You just need to make sure that how you place that piece, that once you sew it and press it open, that you're going to cover all the sections of that A2. So if you're new, you might want to just put a pin right on that line that you're going to sew on. Flip this over, and then just give it a little finger press, and make sure when you flip it back and use your near light source to help you, that that is going to cover all the way around that A2 section. All right, so now we know that's in the right spot. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew directly on this line between A1 and A2. I'm not going to go over those other lines, just right on this line. And before you start sewing on your patterns, just make sure you shorten that stitch length. I'm going to use a 1.8. And you may find it helpful to manually lower your sewing needle, just to make sure that when you put it down, it's going to be right on that line. And once you're done on that line, go ahead and cut. And then we can move on to the next piece. Okay, I've got that sewn on the line. And then I usually like to trim as I go. So I'm just going to fold this piece. I'm going to trim about 1/4 inch, just so I don't have a lot of bulky fabric as I move along here. And then I'm going to take this, I'll finger press it first, but then I'm going to take it to the iron and just give this a pressing so it lies down nice and flat. All right, now that I've got this pressed, I'm ready to move on to A3. So same thing as before, I'm going to cut a piece. This is a green piece. And I'm just going to make sure it's big enough to go all the way around the edge, and plus it needs to be big enough to go past this dotted line here because this is an edge piece. And one thing I like to do when I'm sewing on these other pieces is use the light source behind me to see where that line is, and then I fold the fabric back of A2. I just put a crease in there so that I know where that line's going to fall. That makes it real easy when you're going to place A3, and it's going to go right side down. I'm going to start at that line and move it up 1/4 inch, and that way I'll have the same allowance I need. And again, I'm just going to put a pin in just to check it. And once I fold it, it should be plenty big. And I do like to put a pin in, not right on the line, because I'm going to sew there just to keep it in place until I get this started. All right, I'm going to sew this and then move on to A4. Okay, now that I've got that sewn, I'm going to again just fold this back a little bit, trim off about 1/4 inch, and then press this piece. And when I'm pressing these, I'm just using a dry iron. All right, I'm just going to keep going with all of my pieces. So I'm going to sew them, press them, and then I'll show you how we put this together. All right, so now that I've got all my pieces sewn, let me just show you how I went about trimming these. I am going to use my ruler as my main guide, and I'm going to use the 1/4 inch on this. So I'm going to lay my lines directly on the solid line. And I like to use that as my cutting guide because then I know I am getting 1/4 inch. And it should be on the dotted lines. But just in case, I know this is the way that I can stay consistent on all of my pieces if I use that same method for trimming each of these blocks. Okay, now that I got these all cut out, let me show you how the witch's hat comes together. And if you do decide to do the cat in the pattern, it'll show you how to put the pieces together as well. All right, so let me show you what order I'm going to sew this into. I'm going to sew these 2 side pieces together, and then these 2 pieces next, and then the hat, middle of the hat pieces, these 2 little pieces here on this edge, and then I'm going to join these 2 little pieces to this guy here, and then sew these together, then put this one, and sew this on these 2 sections here. And the way to sew these together, really simple, just right sides together. And the edges should line up on the patterns. And then to sew these pieces together, I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch, so it'll be right on that line. I am sewing on this blank part here and the blank part on this other side, just because I want the entire length of the piece sewn. All right, so I'm going to go sew these, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what we do next. When I'm sewing the section I to J and H, I am going to do that a little bit differently. I'm going to first sew one side, and I'm going to stop right here on that black line. I'm not going to go all the way to the edge on this one. And then I'm going to sew it to the back of H. It's a little bit of a Y seam here, so I just want to let you know if you're sewing along that you want to just make sure you watch that section right there. And just to show you a little bit closer, so I've got sewn right to that point, and then I'm just going to fold it open. And don't be afraid to bend this section here. I'm going to line up that I2 to H1, and then I'm going to sew from the edge, and I'm going to stop right at that point where I had left off before. And the witch's hat is done. And this should finish 12.5 inches square. All right, now the fun part, ripping all this paper off. When you rip the paper off, just be real careful that you're not pulling your sewing stitches out. This is where you'll be really thankful when you have that small stitch, because it really helps perforate the paper and makes it tear a lot easier when you get to this part. All right, now I have my little witch hat all finished. So I'm going to set this one aside, and now I'm going to work on the border of the pillow. And for the border, we need a total of 16 5-inch squares or charm squares. And I'm just using the leftover ones from the Spooky and Quick Quilt Project that I had out in last week's video. And essentially, we're going to take these and turn them into little 4 patches. I've already have a few made, so I'm just going to take 4 here. And we want to pair these together so that they have a nice contrast, maybe a light and a dark. And then we're just going to layer a pair right sides together. Same with the next one. And so from your 16 squares, you're going to have 8 pairs. And then the first thing we're going to do is sew a 1/4 inch on 2 opposite sides of each of these sets. Okay, I've got my lines sewn on 2 opposite sides for each of the sets. And then we're going to cut this in half. Since these are 5 inches, the halfway mark is 2.5 inches. I'm going to repeat that on the other one here. Now we're going to press these open, and I am going to press the seams open on each of these. I have my seams pressed open. Then I'm going to pair them with a different set, and you can mix these up as much as you like. And I'm going to make sure I'm aligning the seams on 2 of the sides here. Just put a pin right in that seam to keep it together. Same on the other side, make sure those seams are nice and aligned. I'm going to go ahead and repeat that with this side here. And I'm aligning these just so I don't have 2 similar colors right on top of each other. And then again, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on 2 of these sides that we have the pins in. And now that I got these 2 sides sewn, I'm going to cut this in half again. I'm cutting it on the unsewn side at the middle point. And this is still 5 inches here, so the middle point's 2.5 inches. And then I've got my little 4 patch here. And I'm going to press these seams open as well. All right, now that I've got my 4 patches done, I can lay out the border of this. And then for the top row, I just need 5 of my 4 patches. And for the sides, I just need 3. Okay, now that I've got this all laid out, I'm probably just going to sew 3 together on each of the sides and then sew them to my middle section. I'm going to press all the seams open, and then I'm going to sew this top row together and the bottom row, and then sew the whole pillow top together. And I'll come back and show you what we do next. All right, and there I've got my pillow top all done. Now I could just turn this into a mini little quilt, but I'm going to go ahead and quilt it, and then I'm going to turn it into a pillow. And I'll come back later and show you how I make it into a pillow. All right, so I've got my pillow top all quilted, and I did go ahead and square off the edges. And I did a real just simple, quick quilting stitch because it's just a pillow. Now to turn this into a pillow, for my back panels, I just cut these 2 pieces that are the width of the pillow, so 20 inches wide, and then 15 inches tall each. And that's going to give me a nice overlap even after I sew the edges down. Right, so now I'm going to measure so I can fold this once and then fold it twice and stitch it in place just to give me a nice sealed edge for where I'm going to insert the pillow. To do that, I'm just going to take my long ruler here and I'm going to draw 1 inch down from one of the long sides. And I'm going to repeat that on the back of the other piece. Now I'm just going to take my iron and I'm going to press to that line, and I'm just going to press along this whole edge here. And then I'm going to do it one more time and then press again. And then once I have this all pressed, then I'm just going to do a top stitch to close it up. All right, so I have these 2 back pieces folded, pressed, and then top sewed to keep that down. Now we could flip this over and make the sleeve on the back of this. And I would do that just by overlapping in the center and then lining up the edges here. Then you would just do 1/4 inch along the entire perimeter of the pillow, and then you would just need to bind it. Or we can lay these pieces right sides together. I'm just going to lay the top piece first. I'm going to line up these edges here. And then I'm going to lay the bottom piece. And I've got a really nice overlap on this. If you don't want that much overlap, you could probably maybe do a 14-inch panel instead of a 15-inch like I did. Okay, and then once I have these lined up, I'm just going to put some clips in place to keep this flat down. So I'm just going to put some more clips on here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a generous 1/4 inch around the entire perimeter. And I'll probably clip off my corners a little bit, and then I'm just going to fold this inside out so the right side's out, and I won't have to bother with a binding that way. All right, I'm going to go sew this and I'll be right back. And there's my finished pillow. I'll just show you the back. Where this opens up is where I'm going to slip in my pillow form. You should be able to fit between an 18 and 20 inch pillow form into this pillowcase. I hope that you enjoyed this project. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and visit our little shop at delafieldquiltco.com. Have a great day and a happy Halloween.